So welcome to this course on edible mulches. We're here in NYTTEPLANTER in Oslo. My name is Andrew Macmillan and I'm a board member of the Norwegian Seed Savers, which is a community seed bank. We have about 800 members that cover the whole country. And a little bit about my background, how I got into this. About 10 years ago, I made a serious attempt to try and grow vegetables for the first time. And it was literally this time of the year. I've been growing them inside my house, the cucumbers and stuff. And it was a nice sunny day. I was, just put them outside and see what happens. And of course, everybody probably knows you try to put a cucumber outside in April in Norway, it doesn't work. So I was quite not very happy about that. And I thought, okay, I better figure out what I did wrong. I started doing some research and I came across a podcast by Elaine Ingham on the soil food web. And she started talking about everything that's happening under the soil, and I realized, okay, there's a lot more to this than just growing some plants in a window and then putting them in the ground. And what she talks about is how do you build good soil? How do you make sure that all the connections in the soil are functioning? And she explains that everybody probably knows that plants, they create sugars they take the carbon dioxide out of the air and they take water and they make carbohydrates, right? Sugars. And those sugars, they exchange with microorganisms in the soil through their roots. So they're giving out exudates, little packets of sugar, and in exchange they're getting nutrients back. And that's the main sort of exchange between the sun's energy and the soil food web. It all comes from the sun originally, which means that the biggest bottleneck in a place like Norway where it's really cold is to try and, as quickly as you can, get life into the soil, right? And if you're going to wait for a tomato to be warm enough to be outside, you're going to have to wait until late May, maybe, until there's no danger of frost. So what you want to do is you want to find plants that can tolerate the cold and that are aimed to they're called establishment plants, and their aim is to take an area that's been opened up, like a bed like this, and establish it, okay? So there's something called regenerative agriculture, which has become very popular lately, and the aim of regenerative agriculture is that instead of breaking down the soil every year and taking out nutrients, you're going to be building nutrients. And especially carbon has become more and more of a focus. When you think about global warming, what's the big problem there? Well, we're taking all this carbon out of the soil and out of the ground and we're throwing it up into the atmosphere, right? So what we want to be doing is the opposite. We want to be holding this carbon in the soil, right, and building humus in the soil. And that is the backbone of a good, healthy soil, is a humus-rich, a carbon-rich soil, okay? So how do you do that? Well, first thing you want to do is to not do what we have here, not open up a bed. Soil doesn't want to be open. You'll never see naturally an open soil. Because as soon as the soil opens, it's just like cutting your skin. The first thing that happens when you cut your skin is the oxygen in the air connects with the blood and it makes a nice little scab, right? Okay, well, what does that in nature? In nature, when there's a landslide or something that opens up the soil, that's a disturbance. Then you have a whole category of plants called establishment plants, pioneer plants. And their job is to act just like the coagulant in your blood, to close the gap of the soil, to keep all the nutrients in, all right? And so in agriculture, we're opening it up because we want specific plants to grow. And so we have to do that to a certain extent, right? So if we go through the principles, first you have to kind of open it up. You have to at least weed it to make sure that the bed doesn't have any weeds in it. And then you want to make sure, the next thing is make sure that there's enough nutrients in the ground. So usually you put compost, which is what we've done here. And then as soon as you know you have weed-free, more or less, and you have compost, so you've got a good nutrient basis to start, then as soon as you've done that, you want to cover it, right? So what I do is I think about, like, you have dead mulches and you have living mulches, right? So in the fall, if I had a bed like this in the fall, I'd be covering it with leaf, which is full of carbon, right? And that would create, it would be like putting a Band-Aid on the soil, okay? And all the worms will then take that carbon out of the leaves and pull it down into the soil, and by doing that, they're not just adding carbon to the soil, but they're also aerating the soil. So they make all these little holes in the soil, right? And the soil needs to be aerated. You need to have at least 20% air in your soil if you want it to be aerobic and not anaerobic, right? Which you want to have. You want to have an aerobic soil. That's because the microorganisms that work best with plants are aerobic, right? They need air. They're air-based, okay? So that's the beginning. That's the dead mulch. Then, as soon as you have enough sunlight, which in Norway is in March already, right? Then you want to take the dead mulch off and you want to add living mulch, okay? Now, when you take the leaf off of a bed, it's again like taking off the Band-Aid. You're going to be adding, it'll be more air coming in, but it'll also warm up the bed because the leaf actually acts as a kind of keeps the heat out. Once, especially if it's dark, it'll warm up about 2 degrees just by doing that, which you want, because you want your bed to warm up, but you don't want it to be open. So, what you do is you want to find establishment plants, and this is one of my favorite established plant right here. It's called Artichokes hortensis in Latin, and in English it's called mountain spinach or auric, and in Norwegian it's called hagemelde, or I prefer the name fjellspinat, mountain spinach, okay? I think it's a very apt name, mountain spinach, because in the amaranth family there's some 2,000 species, one of the biggest families in the world of edible plants. And most of them are all establishment plants, so they do exactly this. They're already in the soil. Some amaranth seeds can last in the soil for 100 years and then sprout, right? So they're there in the seed bank just waiting for, as soon as you open, poof, they come up right away, right? And so this is one of those amazing plants. It can come up like we've done here. You sow the seeds when it's like this. You just take a pack of seeds. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. You don't have to like put them in the ground or anything, because in nature, this plant, it's windy now, this plant will blow in the wind, see? The seeds they're designed to blow in the wind, and they're designed to spread themselves all over the place. But if you just spread them out like this on the ground, you don't have to do anything else. Just spread them out like that. Preferably also have some water to put on them right away, because once they're wet, then they're going to be more likely to stay where you put them. And also, that gets them germinating. They germinate real fast in these conditions. And you can come out in the morning and it'll be frost, and you can see them germinating, setting down roots with frost around them. And even like -7, 8, you can still see little plants like this size, totally fine, no problem with a minus at night. You need some plus during the day, of course. There's no point doing this if there's snow everywhere. But basically, as soon as you can work the bed, as soon as you can warm the bed up enough, then you can just sow, right? And your aim is to open up the bottleneck, right? The bottleneck of photosynthesis. You want to get that energy from the sun, the sugars, into the ground. That gives the microorganisms something to work with. As soon as that happens, you're building soil. You're creating a bed, a living bed, not a dead bed. So it goes from sleeping to awake, right? When you've done that, you can then move on to the next plant. Where's the coriander seed? Okay. The next one is coriander, which we've already sown here. And that's also, it's a beautiful plant that's super easy. It's exactly the same principle. You just broadcast the seeds. And you can also, if you want to, I use plugs. I don't know exactly what the word is in English, but basically it's like a tray like this with plugs. And if you sow, let's say half a tray, usually a tray has something like 70 to 90 plugs. If you sow half a tray of coriander and half a tray of fenugreek, then you can put those plugs out in the areas where the Artichokes, the mountain spinach, doesn't fill the little gaps. So there's different ways of doing it. Either you can do like I do, you can first broadcast the most hardy one, which is the mountain spinach, and then you can come back in a couple weeks and look at all the sprouts, and you can go, okay, there's a little gap here, I'll throw a little bit of fenugreek seeds there, or a little bit of coriander seeds there, until the whole bed gets filled up, right? So in nature, things happen in waves, right? First, a bottleneck opens, right? Then the seeds come up in one wave. But it'll be the hardiest ones that come up first. Then, a little bit later, when it's a little bit warmer, the next wave will come, right? And that's how nature works. That's how we also, when we used to, in the old days, we would go from one area to the next. We would follow the waves in nature. Oh, this tree is fruiting now. This thing's happening there. That's how it works, right? So it's the same principle here. The first wave is the coldest one. That's Artichokes. Then fenugreek is also a really old cultivated plant. There were found seeds of fenugreek in the grave of Tutankhamun. So we know that it's been used for millennia, okay? And the amazing thing about fenugreek is it's a nitrogen binding plant, okay? That means it produces its own nitrogen. So you have the mountain spinach needs nitrogen, so it wants nitrogen. And then the fenugreek, it makes its own nitrogen. So those plants together work really well, okay? They both go to seed really easily. So it's very easy to save seeds from them. Coriander, it makes beautiful flowers. So both fenugreek and Artichokes don't really make flowers, okay? They're more wind-pollinated plants. Whereas the coriander makes these beautiful white flowers. So then you have a plant that attracts insects. And the interesting thing about these three plants is that it's one of the most traditional combinations for a dish that's called in Urdu, it's called palak paneer, which just means spinach and cheese, okay? And if you go to South Asia, it's eaten everywhere. Iran, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, that whole area, it's like a backbone plant or a backbone dish. And what's in it? Spinach. This is mountain spinach. Fenugreek. You cannot make a spinach dish without fenugreek. I mean, it's important. And coriander, fresh coriander leaves, and also onions. All right, now that's the fourth plant in this guild, right? And onions are super easy to grow. They're perennial, as you can see here. This is chives that have grown up, just popped up from last year. And if you take a chive plant like this, or any allium, you can just plug it in the ground like this at the edge, and this will happen here gradually over a few years. So I use onions. There's like 600 different species of onions, and I use onions on the bed corners as a protection because they're really easy to move. You can just pull up an onion and put it somewhere and it'll be fine. In fact, it kind of likes it because it likes to be divided. Then it makes more onions. It's very drought tolerant, and the edges of beds are often the driest areas. Plus, they create really dense networks of plants, like you see here. So you're also creating a boundary against perennial weeds that could come in. And they make beautiful flowers, so that brings insects in, okay? So here, just in this little bed, we have the 4 cornerstones of a really good dish. And they're super easy to grow, right? And they're super easy to save seeds from. And they act as a natural mulch. And it takes 0 time to grow them. And when you harvest them, you can also harvest them in waves. So if you start on this, start at the side of the bed and you start harvesting, right? You make one dish out of maybe a third of this bed. And then you come back next week and you make a dish out of the next third of the bed. And you come back the week after that and you make a dish out of the last third. By that time, this side is already ready to be harvested again, right? So that's how you do it. You just go in waves. And if you keep doing that in waves, you're basically mowing. It's called cut and come again. And you can do that with lots of plants. But these plants especially work very well together because you're going to want to make a dish out of all of them. So it's nice to be able to just go in, mow something down, and eat it, right? Super easy. All right? And the other thing that's nice about it is you've occupied this space in terms of photosynthesis early. As early as possible, you got life in the soil, right? It's covered it. And then if you want to put something else there, let's say you want to put tomatoes here, well, then you just weed out the area that you're going to put the tomato in. And the nice thing about all these plants is they're very easy to weed out. Literally, you can just pull a spinach plant up, it comes right up out of the ground. You weed out the area that you want, put your tomato plant in there, and you're good to go. right? It's not really going to compete that much with it because you continue to cut it. So it's not going to be a problem. And then what you do is you leave a few plants, maybe at the north end, right? You leave them to go to seed. If you have 2 of these Atriplex plants, you'll have seeds for like years, literally. I had one plant last year, okay, in the greenhouse, but still, it grew 4 meters tall, and then it got, the stalk was like that, and then it fell over, and then it started shooting up sideways shoots. So one plant must have given me like, I don't know, 10,000 seeds from one plant, okay? And some amaranth plants can give hundreds of thousands of seeds from one plant. Right, so that's pretty much all there is to say about it. It's a really nice combination. The worst case scenario is you have some really good food to eat without hardly having to do any work. And somebody comes and looks at your bed and they're like, wow, there's a lot going on in this bed, right? And the best case scenario is you use it as a foundation to build even more diversity. And that's another regenerative principle. Always be adding diversity. Try and find how much can you bring into a small area. Intensively cultivate instead of just having, like we do nowadays, we'll have a huge area where we'll like, it's tragic what's happening in the world. We'll go in there and we'll spray the whole thing down with some kind of spray that kills everything, all the connections in the soil. Think about it. Everything is dead, and then we'll plant one hybrid that doesn't even reproduce, right? And that's it. So we're like zeroing out the ecology every time we do that. In this case, you're building the soil and you can save seeds from it so the plants are adapting to local conditions, right? You do it in waves. It's much, much more organic. It's much more natural, and it's much better for the ecology. And if everybody, there's been some studies done, the University of California, they did a study and they said that for every kilo of vegetables people grow themselves, that's 1 kilo of carbon that's not being emitted. And if you do it in a regenerative way, I would dare to say it would be 2 kilos, right? So if everybody does a little bit of this, it doesn't take that much for everybody to start going in this direction. It's much more beautiful. You're connected to what you're eating. You see it growing. It's beautiful. And you can save seeds from it as well. That's to be a part of the whole cycle of a plant. Gives a lot more than to just eat it just for itself, because then you sort of, you haven't completed the cycle, right? So I'm like that with trees as well. I have a big birch tree outside of my house, and I have my compost at the base of the birch tree. So in the fall, the leaves, I collect all the leaves from the birch tree, I cover my beds with them, and then when the beds are fully productive and they're finished, I take all of that and I put it at the base of the tree to compost again. So I've got a whole cycle of nutrients with my tree, right? So I am my tree. I'm eating my tree and I'm feeding my tree, right? And the same thing with the seeds. I'm saving the seeds, right? So then you're connected to the plant in a totally different way. The plant is a part of your tribe, right? It's a part of your village, right? And that's how it used to be. We used to all have plants that we saved seeds from. And now suddenly, some big companies dominate the world's seed production, right? In Norway, there's not really any vegetable seed production to speak of. We get almost all of our seeds from Italy, Netherlands, Germany, and the States, right? And maybe some further east. So what we need is more people doing this sort of stuff. There's a lot of possibilities in Norway for seed saving. It's not that difficult. If you join the Norwegian Seed Savers, you can join a guild. Let's say you're interested in amaranth. You can learn everything about amaranth through the guild. Or if you're interested in brassicas, kale, we're having a course in a week's time on how to save seeds from kale, right? Or the cabbage family. Join a guild, get involved, and learn how to do this in a more sustainable way. All right? Thanks.
Thank you.